Hello, and welcome to Message in the Middle with Marianne. We all know that life is hard, right? It's messy, it's unpredictable, but it can be wonderful all at the same time. My hope is that we can take a deep dive into self-development topics and explore life's lessons through book clubs, conversations, and interviews. And together, we can uncover the lessons that others have already learned to help us navigate this crazy, wonderful ride called life. Hello and welcome to Message in the Middle. I'm your host, Marianne, and now that you have a foundational understanding of EFT or tapping from our previous episode with Corby Furrows, and for anybody that missed that but wants to check it out, I'll put the link in the show notes in case you didn't catch that episode. But if you're still not quite sure it's real or thinking it might be a little too woo-woo, I think you're going to enjoy today's episode with Dr. Jill Wener, because we're going to explore some of the evidence and some of the experience that she has seen that supports the validity and effectiveness of tapping. First, though, let me tell you a bit about Dr. Jill Wener. She's a board-certified internist, EFT tapping practitioner and trainer, anti-racism educator, DEI consultant, trauma specialist, expert in physician wellness, and co-founder and partner at Conscious Anti-Racism, LLC. Dr. Wener is the co-creator of the CME-accredited Conscious Anti-Racism training programs, the host of the Conscious Anti-Racism podcast, and the co-author of the best-selling Conscious Anti-Racism book. Additionally, she has created CME-accredited EFT tapping and meditation courses. Dr. Wener is passionate about helping people take responsibility for their problems and teaching them practical, easy, and rewarding trauma-informed tools to take self-improvement to the next level. Hello, Dr. Wener. Thank you for being on the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So your bio spans a huge amount of things, multiple areas of expertise, and it's pretty impressive, but I'd love to zoom in on specifically what brought tapping into your life and why has that become such a big core modality that you use as an instrument in your work?
Sure. That's a great question. So to back up a little bit, I learned to meditate in 2011 when I was really burnt out in my medical career, and it completely changed my life. And then eventually I said, I want to spend 3 months in India and train to be a teacher in this tradition. So I did that. And coming out of my teacher training, I was basically sort of brainwashed to think that I knew all the answers and that I had it all figured out and that like meditation was going to solve all my problems. And like, if they hadn't yet, it was just because I hadn't meditated enough. And there was this kind of like, implied like blaming of the human being for not being perfect enough. Or if only you would just meditate more, then all your problems would be solved. And so it's your fault if you still aren't perfect.
Wow, you drank the Kool-Aid, huh?
Yeah, I drank it glass after glass. And so I believed that about myself. And then there's some Me Too type of drama happened in my meditation community, which did not happen to me directly, but was pretty devastating. Some of the stuff that came out and other stuff about the community that I was realizing that I really didn't like or agree with. A lot of that was this kind of mindset. And I was pretty devastated. And I felt like I can't tell anyone this because then I'm going to look like an imposter for teaching meditation. Like I'm teaching something that's broken or wrong. And it took a lot of work for me to kind of realize it's not the meditation, it's the crap that goes along with it, with the community. But I was afraid to like admit that I wasn't a perfect person because I thought that I was supposed to be this evolved, we were taught, and I kind of lapped up you're this perfected version of humanity.
Yeah.
And I looked around me and I saw all these other teachers in my community just acting completely ridiculous. And I said, this is not all it, like, it's great. And it changed my life and nothing will take that away. So I met this woman, I was in a networking group and I met this woman who was a tapping practitioner. And I'd heard about tapping the year before. I was teaching meditation at this medical conference for women physicians. And the other speakers at that conference were talking about, there were a psychiatrist and a psychologist who worked at the VA, the Veterans Hospital, using tapping with their PTSD patients. So my first exposure was very clinical. And I thought, this is really interesting. And they had us do a little like practical, practicing it. And I liked it, but I didn't quite get the technique. But I was like, maybe I'll train to learn how to teach this. I never was like, I need it for myself. And so I thought I had heard of it. And so then I met this woman who was a tapping practitioner. And there was something about her. We went and had coffee. And I just like spilled my guts to her. There was something about her that made me feel so safe. And I told her everything. And she said, just let me do one tapping session with you. Just give me this one chance. And I was like, whatever. And so I did the same with her. And I felt like myself for the first time in months.
Wow.
It was amazing. I had tried other kind of modalities to get myself out of this. I would say it was a depression after dealing with everything that had been going on. And I just was like, oh my God, this is incredible. And so then I ended up doing a few packages with her. And then she had a training. So then I did her training and then I did more training. And that is kind of how I became.
Wow. I got to stop and just recognize that I loved, and for those that can't see, the eye roll was sort of there when you were, like, okay, let's just do it. Right. And, I was honest with you up front that I'm kind of on that fence of I'm a very logical thinker and it's a little woo woo. And I'm trying to learn more. And I've shared now in the episode that will air before this, that after my recording with Corby, she offered to do a quick walkthrough of it with me to see how it impacted me or if I felt anything. And I am still trying to rectify in my brain how, but I feel like it really had an impact. We did it on sleep because I'm just always had struggle with sleep. I really feel like it's made a difference. So I've now had that experience, but I was coming to it from a place of not really sure if I bought in on it yet. And that's, you and I talked about, one of the things that I loved with talking with you is you're a doctor, you're very logical, very pragmatic, very data driven. And for us that live in that space, it's hard sometimes to step over on the other side. And so to have those experiences, it's fantastic. Which leads me to my first question. Can you share with us any evidence, any research? What are you hearing out there? Give us some facts that sort of back up that this is a real thing, that this really works.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think first off, if there was something that was fully evidence-based, but it didn't work for me, I wouldn't want anything to do with it. If it doesn't work, if I'm not experiencing it, if it's not kind of easy to pass on to other people and have them experience it, I don't care about all the evidence in the world. I'm not going to propagate it, if that's the right word, because it's not helpful.
Yeah.
So this is extremely helpful and it works and it has evidence, which I really love. So for me, the evidence is almost secondary because I've seen how it works in me and I see how it works in the people I work with.
Yeah.
And it's really great that it is evidence-based because I think that helps a lot of people kind of warm up to the idea of it because it looks funny.
Yeah.
I mean, you're saying it not only looks funny, but it kind of feels funny because we're sitting on our face and our chest. We're actually saying out loud the things that are bothering us, which no one tells us that's okay. We're never supposed to just repeat over and over again.
Feels weird.
Yeah. And so it's like, what? Aren't I just making things worse? Isn't saying negative stuff bad for me? And it's like the opposite. It actually allows us to embrace our full humanity. And by honoring the negative, quote unquote, negative feelings, then we can actually process them in a healthy way. So that being said, I'll talk about some of the evidence with a caveat of, I care about the evidence, but I'm not like an expert in the evidence because I'm an expert in like teaching this to people and working with people.
Yeah.
So I'll give a couple studies or I'll talk about the mechanism a little bit and I'll give a study and then I'll give a resource for people to kind of check out more of the data. One of the studies that was done by a guy named Dawson Church and his colleagues compared an hour of EFT tapping to an hour of conventional therapy to an hour of, I guess, to placebo. I don't really know. I guess they maybe just measured people's blood. They actually measured people's cortisol levels. That's the chemical that comes in our blood, increases with stress. And they measured also like subjective improvement of emotional symptoms, some depression, anxiety, mood, that kind of stuff they measured as well. And the tapping decreased cortisol by 24%.
That's pretty significant.
Compared to both the therapy and the placebo. So doing an hour of this actually was shown to decrease cortisol by quite a significant amount, which is pretty amazing. And then it also kind of had correlated improvement in some of the symptoms, but I don't know, the study wasn't probably big enough to measure statistically significant differences. So that is one thing that I think is really amazing, kind of scientifically showing that our cortisol levels drop. There is a woman named Peta Stapleton, Peta, and then Stapleton. And she is an EFT researcher in Australia. And she has a website and she has a bunch of YouTube videos where she actually like will go through the year's data on EFT and kind of summarize the new data. And she does it every year. And she has a website also with a ton of data. Another thing that I feel like does validate tapping is that my tapping train the trainer course just got accredited for continuing medical education. So it's like evidence-based enough that the medical establishment is using it, which I think is really cool. I want to give another resource for people to look at. So there's a website called EFT Universe. That's like an accrediting organization that teaches tapping, and they have a whole like evidence section. So you can go there and look at all the different data. And they've studied it in sleep and in burnout and in trauma. I mean, it's been studied in a whole different range of different like symptoms and also a whole range of different populations of people, groups, nurses or students or teachers or whatever. The reason why I don't pay that much attention to that part is because there are people who have already like put all of that together, and it's super helpful. And if you want, I'll stop there and I can talk a little bit about the mechanism of it as well.
I think that would be great. Yeah. So people understand it. Yeah.
Yeah. So what they understand about it so far is basically the first, I'm just like hearing myself talking about this and I feel like I sound so clinical and boring. It's just like, I'm like, well, it's been shown to decrease cortisol.
That'll be what just aligns with some people's thought process, right? That's the piece.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So there's two ways that it's shown to work. The first is that it activates the parasympathetic nervous system. So that's the part of our innate nervous system that is our rest and digest and relax and heal part, as the opposite of the sympathetic, which is the fight or flight, like stress part of our nervous system. So it activates the parasympathetic nervous system, which is going to calm everything down. It's going to like lower our heart rate. It's going to allow the body to be in a receptive place to heal and manage stress. And it's funny because there are very, very few side effects of tapping. Most of the ones that are, I would say all but one, are because it activates the parasympathetic nervous system, which can actually cause yawning and it can cause sighing. And I don't know if people know this, but when we sigh, that's, and we're like exasperated, that is our body's own innate way to calm itself down.
I actually did not know that.
Yeah, it's really, really cool. So sighing and the parasympathetic nervous system are tied in together. And also sometimes our stomach may gurgle or sometimes people belch just a tiny bit. And that's not it's not like that doesn't happen to everyone and it doesn't happen every time. But so when people yawn or sigh during tapping, that's how I actually know that one of the ways I can tell that it's working. It doesn't happen to everybody. It doesn't have to happen to work, but that's one of the things. So it's parasympathetic nervous system. And then the other way that it's been shown to work is that we have this part of our brain that can be called the stress center of our brain. That's the part of our brain that's like looking out in the environment to make sure that if we hear a sound that we protect ourselves from a bear that might be coming to attack us. So it's looking around at all the different like stimuli in the world to determine if it's safe or unsafe. And if our brain thinks it's unsafe, then it sets off the fight or flight response. So that's the stress center of our brain. It's in charge of deciding, do I need to panic or do I not need to panic? And tapping, as we tap on the different tapping points and say the things out loud, that actually sends calming signals up to the stress center of our brain. And it tells us that we're safe. In the context of something that's distressing, we're tapping on the things that are making us upset or that we're already upset about, but then we're telling our brain that even though that's happening, we're safe and
it's okay.
And so it shifts the way the nervous system, shifts the way our brain is processing stress, which is so beautiful. And I can see it happen. You can feel it happen when you tap yourself.
Yes.
And so those are the two main ways that at this point, at least, that are elucidated, that have been determined to be part of why it's effective.
So one of the things that while you were explaining all that, I kept thinking about is it all makes sense for a immediate relief of. So I'm anxious, I'm in a crowd, I'm having to do a speech, whatever. I have to have a difficult conversation, right? So I use this technique and it'll calm me down per se. But I'm also hearing that it helps for long term. You said yourself, it brought you back to the person you hadn't been in a long time. Mm-hmm. So my brain's still struggling with it. How does it do that? So in the moment, all of you, what you just explained, I understand that it does that, that calming effect. How does that heal me so that it's long term?
Well, I think that there's a few things. I mean, tapping can be used to actually heal trauma. So you can specifically tap on a traumatic memory. It's a specialized technique that I very highly recommend that people don't try it on at home with themselves, or like I recommend doing it with a trained tapping practitioner. But we can actually go through a historical event in our lives. It could have been last week. It could have been 3 decades ago that was traumatic, and tap on that. And that just, again, it's kind of rewiring the way our brain
thinks about that thing.
Yeah, the way, because it's not the event itself that's traumatizing for us. It's the way it lands in our body. It's the way that we perceive it. And so we're kind of tapping on it in the past to make our bodies feel safe and healed and processing all the stuff that comes up around that event. So that is one way that tapping can have a long-term effect, is that we go through specific events. And then the thing is, like, if you have insomnia one night and you tap on insomnia, you can get insomnia later and you can tap again on that insomnia. So it's not going to necessarily cure insomnia forever. For that night, it works. But there are times when we tap, especially if we work to get our emotional intensity level all the way to 0, that it can be a more permanent, longer term benefit. And I don't know if I have like the scientific reason, but it's kind of like once something is healed and resolved, it's not in there anymore to impact us. And I think part of what I loved about working with my tapping practitioner, especially that first day, is the way she kind of guided the process, and her intuition kind of felt what I was feeling. She said things and like acknowledged and validated what I was feeling, and kind of gave me because it makes your brain receptive to hearing other things, or it also makes our brain receptive to having our own insights. It's called a cognitive shift. So when we're tapping and all of a sudden I'm feeling really grateful all of a sudden. I'm feeling this compassion for this person who I was so angry towards 10 minutes ago. That's because our brain is allowed to relax, and we're actually able to connect in with our own intuition. So we're able to kind of have these aha moments as we're tapping that our stress and deep, intense emotions aren't allowing us to connect with. So I think that's a part of it. And I think if you're working with a practitioner and they kind of see you and validate you and maybe point out some things about what you're saying that you didn't realize on your own, like that also can be helpful.
Yeah. For me in that sleep episode, it was about, it's going to sound so silly, but it was connecting the dots that I created my own belief of, I'm a bad sleeper. I always have to be productive and I don't have time to sleep. And I literally used to say, I'll sleep when I'm dead. There's plenty of time when I'm dead, right? And I know that I've done those things, but I never really connected it to creating this belief system and this pattern of behavior. And as we're talking through, exactly what you said, as we're talking through, we're going, this is silly, but I don't, and the whole thing. And we got to that. And it was like, I got really quiet. I was still tapping, but I got really quiet. And she's like, what's going on right now? And it was, to your point, you can see it. Yeah. You can tell I was connecting. Yeah. I finally was connecting that. And thinking on it now and with my logical brain, it's like silly that I didn't connect that, and that it was, not this big epiphany that I couldn't have figured out, but I didn't. So it's wild like that, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I forget the name of it, but there's a term for that in tapping. That's basically the phenomenon of people being like, I wasn't really even that upset. Like, because it shifts the way our brain processes things so impactfully that it's hard to even remember. Like, why was I so keyed up about that? It's amazing. So there's actually like, I wish I could remember the name, because it's something I learned in my training, and don't really, the concept I know, but then the name I don't have to use regularly. But yeah, it happens all the time. And I'm glad you mentioned self-limiting beliefs, because that's another way. I had all these self-limiting beliefs around love and relationships. And my story was like, I'll never find someone who really understands me, who gets me. I'm a doctor, and now I'm a meditation teacher. And like, hard enough as a woman to find woman doctor to find a partner, but now I'm a meditation teacher too. And I'm like, so I had this story. And so that's what I was creating, that no one was ever going to understand me. And so we actually worked on that together. And I met my husband while we were tapping, like while I was working with her. And I didn't know he was going to end up being my husband, but we were kind of able in real time to process some of that stuff. And then once those self-limiting beliefs are processed, they're rewired. Yeah. They're not there anymore, or they can pop up in other ways, but you kind of work towards moving through those or being able to recognize them more. And that also can have a long-term effect, because you're seeing the world differently. You're seeing yourself differently.
Yeah. So tell me, where do you see the most success I mean, you've worked with different people and they're coming for different reasons.
Yeah.
Where do you see the most success?
Oh, that's a good question. I will say that I led free tapping sessions during COVID. On my own, I did like every day, I had a free tapping session that was kind of open to the public, come and show on Zoom.
Wow, amazing.
Which got complicated because then people started Zoom bombing. So then I had to like change the link and stuff like that. But so I did that. And then I also offered free sessions through a group called the Mindful Healthcare Collective. That was a group of 9 women physicians who do mindfulness and other types of healing work. So we all were offering free sessions. And I will say during COVID, that was when I really realized that this is kind of like my magic power. This was my superhuman, whatever, because people were coming in gutted, anxious, feeling shame, feeling guilt, feeling anger, overwhelm, frustration. After tapping with them for 15 minutes, they're like feeling better. They're
15 minutes.
Yeah. And it's not like it went away forever. It's not like the rest of COVID was a breeze for them, but it was able to help people regulate their nervous systems and to kind of see past these very intense emotions, which can be very scary to have those intense emotions and not know what to do with them. So that, I think it was such an honor, really, and a privilege to be able to facilitate that for people.
Yeah.
Because I left medicine in 2015. I moved towards other things and then decided not to go back, but I wasn't there on the front lines. I wasn't able to do the patient care because I wasn't practicing anymore, but I was able to kind of contribute in my own way. So that was really incredible. I work with people who are going through difficulties in their relationships, processing divorces, processing grief, trauma work. So I do a lot of deep trauma work with people processing bad things that happened to them, maybe in their childhood or early adulthood. I have some clients who have cancer who have been kind of going through treatment and then coming out of treatment and how that can impact them. So there's really a lot of different ways it can work. And it's so adaptable that it can be applied to anything. I will say the people that I've had the hardest time like helping, I guess, are people who have very, very intense generalized anxiety disorder, who were like in a constant state of just, because tapping is great. I don't suggest that tapping can cure cancer. I don't think it can cure anxiety or depression. It can help with the symptoms,
right,
or the emotional consequences of those things.
Yeah.
But so people who have really, really intense anxiety, not like, oh, I'm really anxious about a few things, but the constant all day, it's almost like it, or at least for me, and there may be other tapping practitioners who have found a way to do that in a more impactful way. But for me, I just always want, it's not going to be harmful, but it just doesn't have that like whoosh, like huge impact the way it potentially could with other people. So I would just kind of caution people who have that, who want to try it. You're not broken. There's nothing wrong with you. It's just, I always encourage multiple modalities and other treatments for anxiety can work nicely with tapping to kind of help.
So you said try it. So what is a great way to try it? I know, and guys, we're going to put a couple of links in the show notes. You've given us a freebie out there for folks to get started, and you have some obviously courses and such that people can subscribe to and do some on their own based through those courses. But I guess my thought is, do you advise people to do it on their own? Is it something that you can actually do on your own effectively? Like, what's your thought around that?
It's a yes and answer, I guess. So it can be done on your own. It can be done with a recorded video or audio recording. It can be done in a group. It can be done one-on-one.
Okay.
And everyone's different. So I have some people who love doing it with the recordings. I have a kind of monthly membership thing, and they'll go in and they'll pick the topic they want to tap on, and that's all they want. And for them, the thought of doing it one-on-one is way too intimate and way too personal. And they're like, they get what they need from it.
I get that.
I have other people who, like in my online meditation course, I had a little blurb about like a bonus about tapping. And I know people who watch that one video and then they're just tapping on their own.
Okay.
No big deal. And loving that. And for me, I think because I got into it with my practitioner, I didn't tap on my own for a really long time because she's so sophisticated in the way that she would work with me that I felt like there's no way I could do this on my own. And so eventually I did start doing it on my own. So I think the important thing to remember is that tapping can work for everybody to some extent. And if a person tries a modality that doesn't quite work for them, It doesn't mean that they're broken. It doesn't mean that tapping won't work for them. It just means that maybe they need a different format or a different person. So someone could go, I have like a free tap. I think you're going to put that in the show notes, a free tapping sequence on regulating your nervous system on my website.
Yeah.
And maybe the way I do it doesn't connect with that person. And maybe they go find another tapping practitioner and it works for them. Same kind of concept, but they connect in with someone differently, or the way they do their recording is different from mine. So, and then I, have a free resource on my website of how people can create their own tapping sequence. Some people just take off, hit the ground running and they love it. So what I want people to know is that, and I, again, my first time actually tapping at that workshop, I took on something way too big. It was this like complicated friendship scenario. And I was trying to process that as I was doing a tapping worksheet in a group setting. And it didn't really work because it wasn't the right thing. So I didn't have an amazing experience the first time I did it. And if I had stopped there forever, how sad would that be? Because I would have missed out on this amazing opportunity for my own growth and then to be able to help other people. So just experiment with it. You can go on YouTube and there's tapping stuff for anything. And I think the one thing I would say for people, if you're not doing my resources, some people out there will do a guided tapping sequence and they don't give time for you to respond. Like usually if you say something and you're tapping on the top of the head and you say, I'm so anxious, I'm going to leave time for the person watching the video to then repeat back, I'm so anxious. But sometimes they'll just be like, I'm so anxious. This anxiety is really bothering me. And they just go through it.
That's a great observation because, I did the repeat and you almost have to buy into it. I feel like,
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't work if you don't repeat it. It's like, that's a huge part of it. And if you're not given time to do that, then you have to maybe pause the video or you're trying to rush it in
or memorize it so you can do it again.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
Great point. I love all of what you just said, but what I really love about this thing is that I really love that it's so accessible. So for me, one of the things is, finding things, I'm of course bringing experts and people that offer things, and of course they cost money, but not everybody can afford that. So I love it when there's an opportunity for people to at least take it to a basic level by themselves. Yeah. And then if they want more, sure, hire somebody, or if you need some help or you have the money and you can afford to be guided in a better, more substantial way, fantastic. But if we can give tools for free to people to help themselves, I mean, which lines up with what you want to do. So that to me is so big. And that's what to me made this seem like such a thing that I wanted to talk about and I wanted to share, because if people hadn't heard about it, it's worth a try. What do you got to lose?
It's funny. I used tapping in my anti-racism work to help people of all identities process the intense emotions that come up in that space. And we were doing a training, my partner and I, last week, and one of the guys spoke up and he's like, so I watched the tapping video and it was just like, I don't know, it was just kind of weird. I just feel like I'm not the kind of guy that taps. Like, I'm not going to be the guy that uses that.
And I get that. I get that reaction.
But I was like, I hear a self-limiting belief there. He's telling himself it's not going to work for him. Yeah. Because it's not the kind of thing that he does. Yeah. And I'm like, it's actually a scientific thing. And I shared a story of my husband. My husband, when our book came out, it's Conscious Anti-Racism book, there's a section in tapping on it. And he was reading the book because it's, hopefully good and to be supportive. And he got to the tapping section, the tapping chapter, and he was like stuck. He just didn't get past that chapter. And so I was like, I think there was just a resistance because it's what I do. And probably he knew it was probably gonna be good for him. And sometimes we just don't want to do the things that are going to be good for us, particularly if our partner does that professionally. Sometimes it just feels like intimidating or something. I don't know. And then eventually he did it. He did it about something completely unrelated. And he's like, it worked, damn it. He was like mad that it had worked so well. And so I think it's so funny. And I told this story to the guy in the training because of course it feels weird the first time you're trying it, if you haven't experienced it. And it's different if you haven't, I had been meditating forever and ever. And even then I still thought that I didn't need it or that it was not going to work as well or whatever else. So I think that we all kind of have these beliefs that it won't work for us or that we're not the kind of person that would do that. And that's normal too. I just like tapping. I just normalize all of it because all of our feelings around it they're okay. Yeah.
Yeah. they're okay.
Yeah.
But being willing to give it a try, even though it doesn't have to be a but, it can be an and. It feels weird. You say some silly things and it might work for you. So give it a try.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's okay if it feels weird, and it's okay to do something that's outside of your comfort zone. And here's the thing, you can tap on being like, I'm having resistance to doing tapping. You can tap on that. And then that can help make people feel, more open to doing it. I don't force people to do that. I mean, if they want to get through the resistance, then they can get through the resistance. But there's so many different ways it can be applied and help people.
I love that. So I was going to ask you as we wrap, if there was one nugget you wanted people to take away from a conversation about tapping and getting exposed to it, what would it be? We hit on, I think, several of them. Is there anything else that we didn't hit on that you would tell people or that you do tell people?
I would say, in addition to there's different modalities of tapping that work for different people, and that all of our human emotions are normal and it's okay to feel those. I would say that we are all perfectly imperfect just as we are, and none of us need fixing. And when we want to do self-work, there's not going to be one technique or tool that's going to quote unquote fix us, that's going to get to everything that we need. And so I encourage people to be open to trying different modalities. And if anyone is telling you, I have this one answer, it's the only thing you need, run away very quickly. Because
that's a good point.
That's can be
snake oil.
What'd you say?
Snake oil.
Yeah.
That's somebody trying to sell snake oil, right?
Totally. So I would just say, do what works for you, do what you're drawn to, experiment with things, and keep an open mind. I love that tapping filled in the nooks and crannies of stuff that meditation just didn't get. And then I also do self-compassion practice, particularly with my therapist. And that gets the nooks and crannies that tapping doesn't get, or that I don't do for myself with tapping. So there's all these different things that we can use to help whatever we feel like we need in our day, in our life. There's different tools, and, experiment and see what works.
I love that. And I like that you use the word tools, because that's how I now think about these things. They're all just different tools in the toolbox. And sometimes you need a hammer, and sometimes you need a screwdriver, and sometimes you need both.
Yeah.
So you just have to evaluate what's going on with yourself. But there's no harm. I mean, the bigger your toolbox, that's great, right? You can then meet every demand that you have. And I also am starting to shift my thinking about, we don't need to be fixed, and we're all perfect as we are. Or perfect's not a real word, but you know what I mean? We're all great just as we are, right? We're amazing. I think the twist for me and how I've been looking at things, the lens now, is all of these things just help us to experience life differently and maybe shift the way we have experienced things in the past so that they don't hold us up or get in our way. So it's not changing me really. It's just putting on different lenses so that you can look at things differently and process things differently and then handle things differently. So it's just a slight nuance, but I think it's important for people to know they're fine just the way they are.
Yeah.
But if they want to do the work, it really does open up a whole nother world and a whole nother way to look at things, experience things, connect with people, all those good things. This has been great. So just a reminder to folks, we will put all of the links in the show notes. There's some freebies there. There's, of course, a link to the website where you can get more information and get some of the more advanced courses out there so that you can sign up and do some more ongoing work. But give it a try. I say give it a try after doing these episodes. Thank you so much for joining me.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Message in the Middle with Marianne. If you enjoyed the podcast, please take a minute to share it and write a review, as it helps bring new listeners to our audience. If you'd like to keep the conversation going between episodes, please join us at Facebook group Message in the Middle with Marianne.